So one of the things you may struggle with as a coach, and it's one of the things that I struggled with for quite a while, is knowing that fine line between being supportive or showing tough love. And nine times out of ten, people need that support, they need that encouragement, they need that patience, all of those things. But there are times where that's not what's going to be best for your client. And you need to know that, and it takes some experience to learn that. And so there's a learning curve with that. And that's something that in looking back in hindsight, there's times where maybe I was supportive when I needed to crack the whip a little bit more. And that can make the difference between success or failure for someone. And so you need to be able to recognize that. The closer the relationship you have with your client, the easier it is to show that tough love because they know it's in their on their best behalf, and they know you well enough that you're doing it for them. If they don't know you as well, if you don't know them as well, that can lead to more misunderstandings and problems in the future. And you always want to have a professional relationships. You don't want to go off all Bobby Knight on everyone and yelling and screaming, anything like that. But there's sometimes you may need to be more assertive. I'll give you some examples. The first example I'll give you is actually from another sport, from baseball. And Mickey Mantle was a Hall of Fame baseball player, just, I mean, tremendous athlete. But when he first came up to the pros, he struggled really, really badly to the point that he got sent back down to the minors. And even in the minors, he was struggling so bad. His confidence was gone. He was striking out a lot. He was miserable being there. And he's from a small town anyway. So this was a tough transition for him to go from a small town to go to the New York Yankees and then be sent down to the minors. So he called his dad for some support. And his dad, who went by Mutt, had been his coach since he was a kid. And he told his dad everything that was going on, and thought he would get some support from his dad. And his dad's like, "Oh, I'll come see you. I'll come see you, and we'll talk it out." So he gets there and he talks for a while. Once his dad, he feels better that his dad's there, and he's just going to get that support. And finally, his dad said, "Okay, well, let's go. Let's start packing your stuff up and let's go." And Mickey's like, "What?" I said, "No, just go home. I mean, if you want to quit, that's all the guts that you have, that you're going to quit, that you're going to be miserable all the time. Just pack up your stuff and let's go. You can start to work with me in the mines. You can start on Monday. Let's do that." And Mickey was like surprised. He was not expecting that. Last thing you want to do is go home and work in the mines, right? So he kind of like realized what his dad was doing, and it brought him a little bit of a reality check, that bit of tough love. And he said, "You know what? I'll stick it out. I'll try a little harder. I'll figure something out." And you know, his dad didn't stay that long. He just gave him that option of, "Hey, let's go home, pack up your stuff, and let's go." Mickey stuck it out, and the rest was history. He became a great player, but his dad knew him well enough to know that joining him in his pity party was not going to help him, and he needed to a little bit of a reality check. That can be true as a coach in this industry. And I'll give you an example of, I had an athlete getting ready for her first national show, and we were supposed to do a posing practice on that Wednesday, and then we were going to do this in person in my area. And this is a little bit before we started using some of the internet tools that we have now. And she gets a hold of me, and she's tired and she's busy and she's cranky and she's hungry and this and that, whatever. And she just basically wanted to bail on the practice, you know, and we needed to get this practice in. I needed to check her physique. I needed to do a suit check with her. But I also understood what she was going through and how busy she was and how stressed she was. And so I'm like, okay, I get it, fine. And we've done a few shows together, and she like was on a nice winning streak. I said, okay, we'll see you in Vegas and we'll take a look at you there and blah, 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 blah. I should have said, yeah, I get it. That's too bad. Now I'm sorry you had this tough day. What time are you going to be here? Because she really needed um, that check-in, because she was off. I don't know what she'd been going through, been doing, but she was a little bit off by the time we got to Vegas. We could have corrected that. And the suit that she had ordered did not fit the way it was supposed to. And so I could have counseled her right then to use the suit that she had before, which wasn't the right color we wanted, but it fit perfectly and it complemented her physique better. But by not showing tough love and by being considerate I thought I wasn't helping her, you know, I actually did her a disservice by not insisting, hey, send me some pictures or something. And sometimes you can err on the side of being nice, and it's not necessarily what's best for your person. And to contrast that, I had another girl that I was coaching that was trying to requalify for the Olympia. She would fly into San Jose, which is where I was at the time, cab it down to Gold's Gym, change, go, we pose, she'd posing, go to posing practice, then we meet, talk about her diet, training, whatever. She'd change back, cab it back to the airport and fly out. She did that, every other week up until the show, and she went to the New York Pro and requalified for Olympia. So when you think about someone that's doing that kind of thing, and you can see where the success came versus someone that's like either having a bad day or a tough day, and they want to bail out on practice. And I get it. Sometimes that happens. Sometimes it's unavoidable. But as a coach, sometimes you need to make that call in terms of what's best. And again, it's an easier call to make the tighter, closer, better relationship you have with someone. And so you have to ask yourself what's best for them. And it may just take some explaining, say, look, I know you want to do this, I know you want to do that, but we really need to do this, and this is why. So you may be as professional as you can, as understanding as you can, but sometimes you might have to put your foot down in terms of something that you need them to do that's best for them. And sometimes it's you're not going to be able to logically get them to understand it. You're just going to have to be, you know, you got to show the tough love. And one situation, I had a really good buddy of mine was coaching, and he's an incredible coach. And he was coaching someone who's really close to a family member, actually. And they were getting ready for a show. They were doing a series of shows, and she was just tired and bored with the diet and not wanting to do the show, and just really kind of going through it. And they're on the phone forever. And she's like, I don't want to eat this. I don't want to eat that. I'm hungry, blah, blah, blah. Can I have this? Can I have that? Can I have a cheat meal? And he's like, no, you can't. We need to stay on point, and we need to do this and need to do that. And she was like, to the point where, she wasn't trying to listen and just getting mad at him and crying and this, that, whatever. And he's like, finally, it's okay. You're right. You've had a tough time, and I know this has been a real strain on you. So tell you what, why don't you just go and eat anything you want to eat, have as much as you want, drink some wine, get some dessert, this, that, whatever. Then on the day of the show, we'll go up to the judges and explain to them that you were having a hard time, and so you ate all this extra food, and that's why your ass is so fat, and they shouldn't shut you down because of it. Um, you can imagine her reaction, and yeah, and so she hangs up the phone, and I'm looking at my buddy. I'm like, well, that's an interesting approach. And he's like, smiles like, if she was like already checked out and just not going to do anything that she needed to do, you know, until I got her in a different mindset. So he said, and this way she's going to be mad at me, but she's not going to give me the satisfaction of going off her diet. So she's going to stay on her diet and do her thing and be successful. Now he knew her well enough to be able to know how she was going to react. And again, you don't just do this to be mean. Like in this situation, because I knew his situation, I knew her situation. She had asked him, to really lean on her because she had a contract with a supplement company that was contingent upon her doing so many shows and placing, well enough in those shows to maintain a certain ranking in her sport throughout the whole year. And if she didn't do that, it would affect her contract with that company, and that would affect her ability to be in this country, you know. And so it wasn't like, okay, yeah, you can just take one off. I know you're tired, blah blah blah. We'll get to the next one. It's like she had to do this, and he had to pull the strings to remind her to get her to do this. Tough love. It worked. She went. She did that show. She did very well. Obviously they had some things to talk out and work out after that, as far as the emotions of that. And again, as I said, if you're close enough to a person, it's easier to do that, and you can get away with that. As a family member of his, there's always going to be a family member. If it's a client that you're working with, that's more of a risk. That may be the last time you work with that client. They're done with you. So I'm not saying that's an extreme example, but the point is that you can't always just let them do what they want if it's contrary to what's best for them. And so that's where I talked before about how key it is to establish that relationship of communication and trust so that they trust you and they know that what you're telling them is not what's best for you or the team or the industry or an organization. It's what's best for them. And if you insist upon them doing something, or you really, are more adamant about it, there's a reason behind that. Now it's still their choice, and you go with whatever they want to do, and you still are as supportive as possible. You don't get mad at them if they don't want to do it, and you don't, give them less attention or coaching or anything from that. But sometimes you got to realize that a little bit of tough love may be what's best for them. So it's a fine line, and it's easier for me to look back and say, yeah, I could have done, been a little, more stern in this situation or that situation. But when you're in those situations, it's harder to know, and that takes time and that takes experience. So that's a challenge that I face as a coach. That might be a challenge that you will face as a coach just to prepare you for it. So understand that that's a possibility and be supportive whenever you can. But sometimes you may need to use a little bit of tough love.